Welcome to Voice of Africa, where we delve into the heart of global diplomacy and uncover the critical issues shaping our world. If you're passionate about understanding the evolving dynamics of international relations and the power struggles that define global governance, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest content and join the conversation about these pivotal topics. In recent years, a significant shift has been unfolding in the global arena, driven by growing dissatisfaction among BRICS countries and other global South nations with the United Nations, UN. This discontent centers around several key issues, most notably the perceived undue influence of Western nations in major international organizations and decision-making bodies. As we explore this complex issue, we'll uncover the core grievances voiced by these nations and the potential solutions they propose to create a fairer global governance system. The core of BRICS nations' dissatisfaction lies in the belief that the current structure of the UN fails to adequately reflect the interests and perspectives of emerging and developing countries. This sentiment was prominently voiced during a recent BRICS summit, where leaders highlighted the need for comprehensive reforms within the UN. They stressed the importance of enhancing the participation of emerging nations in global decision-making processes, with a particular focus on the Security Council's composition and the veto power held by its permanent members. The composition of the Security Council is a major point of contention. The Council currently comprises 5 permanent members: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China, each with veto power. This arrangement, established after World War II, mirrors a power structure that many argue is outdated in today's geopolitical landscape. BRICS countries, representing significant emerging economies, believe that this framework does not account for their increasing economic influence and geopolitical importance. Beyond the Security Council, there is also a growing call to reassess the veto power held by these permanent members. Critics argue that this power is often used to block actions that may not align with the interests of the Western Bloc, perpetuating a skewed global order. The perceived imbalance in power and representation has led to calls for substantial reforms or even a complete overhaul of the UN system, aiming to establish a more democratic and inclusive global governance structure. One of the main criticisms directed at the UN and other international institutions is their perceived Western bias. BRICS nations frequently highlight what they see as double standards in addressing human rights issues. For example, countries like Russia and China are often heavily criticized for their human rights records, while similar issues in Western countries receive comparatively less scrutiny. This disparity is particularly noticeable in the treatment of refugees and responses to conflicts. A stark example of this double standard is seen in the treatment of refugees. European nations have shown considerable support for Ukrainian refugees, providing substantial resources and aid. In contrast, refugees from other conflict zones, such as Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia, face harsher conditions and receive less support. This inconsistency extends to the Israel-Palestine conflict, where international responses often appear unbalanced. For instance, while there is quick condemnation of Hamas attacks on Israeli civilians, there is relatively muted criticism of Israel's severe retaliatory measures in Gaza, which include cutting off essential supplies and using controversial tactics in densely populated areas. The issue of representation and influence extends beyond human rights and humanitarian responses. BRICS nations argue that global governance frameworks, including the UN, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, are disproportionately dominated by Western powers. They contend that these institutions fail to adequately represent the interests of emerging economies and developing countries. For instance, leadership positions in the IMF and World Bank have traditionally been held by individuals from Europe and the United States, perpetuating Western dominance in global financial decision-making. Economic and developmental concerns further fuel the dissatisfaction among BRICS nations. Many global South countries believe that Western-dominated institutions impose stringent conditions on financial aid and development assistance, which often undermine their economic growth and sovereignty. These conditions frequently prioritize Western economic and political interests over the genuine developmental needs of recipient countries. For example, austerity measures and economic policies that emphasize debt repayment and fiscal discipline can reduce public spending on essential services like healthcare and education, ultimately impeding sustainable development. Geopolitical rivalries, particularly involving Russia and China, have intensified these concerns. Western actions, such as sanctions and political pressure, are often seen as efforts to limit the influence of BRICS nations on the global stage. For instance, China faces significant challenges with Western nations over its policies in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and the South China Sea. Sanctions and other punitive measures imposed by the United States and the European Union are viewed as attempts to curb China's growing economic and geopolitical power, leading to heightened tensions and a sense of being marginalized within the current international order. Similarly, Western geopolitical strategies, including the formation of alliances like the Quad, comprising the United States, India, Japan, and Australia, and AUKUS, comprising Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, are perceived by BRICS nations as countermeasures against China's rise and Russia's assertiveness. These alliances are seen as efforts to contain the influence of BRICS countries, reinforcing the perception that they are being sidelined in the current international system. A particularly contentious issue is the allocation of voting power within the IMF, which remains heavily skewed in favor of Western countries. For example, as of 2020, the United States held the largest share of voting power, despite China's GDP exceeding $14 trillion, making it the world's second-largest economy. BRICS nations argue that this imbalance does not accurately reflect the current global economic landscape, where emerging economies play a crucial role. Global climate change policies also highlight the disparities between Western and developing countries. BRICS nations argue that Western countries often shape climate policies without adequately considering the developmental needs of emerging economies. For instance, while Western nations advocate for stringent emission reductions, BRICS countries stress the importance of financial and technological support to enable their transition to greener economies without stalling their growth. The COVID-19 pandemic further exposed the shortcomings of global governance, particularly in the realm of global health. BRICS countries criticized the World Health Organization, WHO, and other international bodies for what they saw as a biased response that favored wealthy nations. Issues such as vaccine hoarding by rich countries and the slow distribution of vaccines to poorer nations highlighted the need for more equitable global health policies. In light of these concerns, several proposals have emerged for reforming or even replacing the UN. One suggestion is to create a new organization that better reflects the geopolitical realities of the 21st century. This could involve expanding the permanent membership of the Security Council to include countries like India, Brazil, and South Africa, which have significant regional influence and economic power. Another proposal is to strengthen regional organizations, such as the African Union, AU, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and the European Union, EU, allowing them to play a more prominent role in global governance while coordinating with a central global organization for broader international matters. Experts have also proposed the creation of a new entity called the Democratic Nations, DN, featuring a bicameral legislative system to better represent countries based on population size and influence. This model aims to address the democratic deficit in current global governance structures by establishing a system that includes both government representatives and elected officials directly accountable to the global populace. The idea of a World Parliamentary Assembly, WPA, which aligns with the DN proposal, has gained significant support over the years. This assembly would initially act as an advisory body to the UN General Assembly, with the potential to evolve into a more powerful entity with legislative capabilities over time. Recent surveys indicate broad public support for the creation of a global parliamentary body. A poll conducted by the German Friedrich Ebert Foundation found that an average of 60% of respondents in 15 countries supported the idea of a world parliament that represents citizens directly based on population size rather than national government representation. However, implementing such a system faces significant challenges, including the need for broad consensus among UN member states and potential resistance from powerful countries with veto power in the Security Council. Nevertheless, the incremental approach suggested for the WPA, starting as a consultative body, may help build the necessary support and demonstrate its value without immediately threatening existing power structures. Thank you for tuning in to Voice of Africa. If you found this exploration of global governance issues insightful or thought-provoking, please hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analyses and updates. Your support is crucial in helping us continue to provide valuable content and foster meaningful discussions on international diplomacy. Stay connected for more engaging content on the critical issues shaping our world.